Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just getting set up here. Are we good to go, Alberto? Can you see that fine?
We are perfect. Yes, we can see the slide and we can see the camera.
Excellent. There we go. So
All yours.
welcome to the session this afternoon, everybody. As Alberto has said, I am Dr. Amanda Nimon-Peters. And academically, by background, by training, I'm actually a behavioral scientist, first at the University of Adelaide. And so that is the accent that you can hear, that bit of an Australian accent. And then after the University of Adelaide at the University of Cambridge. So as a behavioral scientist, I have always been interested in how people's brains process information, why they behave the way they do, and how they respond to stimuli in their environment. And after leaving Cambridge, I was there for quite a while. I studied, I was a postdoc also. I actually moved into Procter & Gamble at the time at its Western European headquarters in Brussels. And I worked with P&G in many different countries. I had 4 different international assignments. But my goal in that role was to help to take these things that we know are true from science about how people's brains process information, how they respond to messages, in-store layout, communications, and apply those to the activities that we do every day in business. Now, eventually P&G actually brought me out to Dubai, and a fantastic company, wonderful career. But after sort of 10 years in a company of 160,000 people globally, I decided to become an entrepreneur. And so I launched a company in Dubai with the proposition to our clients that if you identify in your organization the people that you most want to invest in, we will make them more effective. And so the idea behind this proposition is through the application of techniques from science, solid, well-known, well-established techniques, we will apply them to people's daily behavior. And as a result, they will be more effective after the program than they were before. Now, I operated the company for around 4 years, and then about 4 years in, I had the opportunity to come and work at Hult, actually. I have had a number of roles at Hult. One of them was, I was one of the 2 heads of global research strategy during the period when we were applying for the triple accreditation that you all know about. So I was one of the heads of global research strategy while Hult was obtaining AACSB and EQUIS accreditation. But I'm extremely happy to report, because this is really my childhood dream, that as of January 2018, I am a full-time professor. I am a research fellow, and I do, the university does allow me to continue to do some business consultancy with clients outside of my regular teaching schedule. I teach a variety of courses. I teach courses on our core program. So courses that all of the students on the program take. And for the purpose of today's talk, the key one to emphasize is Data and Decisions, which is a foundational core course on all our programs, the master's program, the MBA, and the executive MBA. Okay. So out of the next 25 or so minutes, there are a couple of key insights that I want you to take away. And here's the first one. The most frequent decisions that we make, the ones we make on a regular basis in our day-to-day lives, in our private life, in our business life, those decisions that we make, they are not based on systematic, objective data. No matter how much we feel we're basing it on data or how convinced we might be, our frequent decisions, the ones we make all the time, are not based on systematic, objective data. Why is that? That is because your brain is biased. Now, it's not just you. I'm not just talking to Anna from Norway, or who else did I see? Was it Max from Venezuela? It's all of us. My brain is biased. Your brain is biased. Why is that the case? Well, we can see this happy brain here having this brilliant idea and thinking it's so in control of all the data in the universe. But the reality is that our brains are biased, and this is why. So here we have a head and brain. It's a male, a female, a child. Any person is at any given moment having millions of bits of information encroaching on their brain, and your brain just cannot process all this information and cannot treat all those data points equally. So we have these things that we call, in scientific terms, cognitive heuristics. In layperson's terms, these mean biases. And these are just sort of shorthand and easy ways to process information by saying, that's important, that's not, lumping a whole lot of things together and then just dismissing them. And in that way, while we are each doing this, what we're actually doing is we're each using a whole variety of shortcuts that sort of set up our own version of the world. A whole bunch of information we've dismissed, certain individual things, those that are most pertinent to us, that we have paid attention to, that we're coding and that we're storing in our memory. Now, I'd like to give you an example of one of those biases. And in order to do this, we're actually going to start by talking about pigeons, okay? So the work I'm going to present to you now was done by sort of one of the foundational scientists in the field of psychology. And this is back in sort of the 1940s. Excuse me. This psychologist discovered that pigeons actually have superstitious behavior. So let me explain to you how that superstitious behavior can evolve and why it's an example of a bias. You see, our brains are set up to believe that we are the center of the universe, and that when we do things, we have an impact, and the impacts we see are due to ourselves as protagonists. So B.F. Skinner, he's got a whole bunch of pigeons in these various living apparatus, sets of apparatus. And the pigeons are hungry, and for a short period of every day, they get fed. Now, here's how they get fed. There's a 10-minute period during which small amounts of food are delivered at random intervals. When the first amount of food is delivered, the pigeon can recognize more food is coming soon. Now, I already mentioned the intervals at which the food arrives within that 10-minute period are actually random. So by definition, nothing that the pigeon does has any effect on when the food arrives. But here's the thing. The first time the food arrives, pigeon eats, but it hasn't had enough. And maybe it just starts wandering around, maybe it starts turning around, and then suddenly the second bit of food arrives. Over time, as the pigeon experiments with this technique and experiments with turning around in a circle, it learns over and over again that when it turns around in a circle, the next bit of food is delivered. And what Skinner observed was that over a period of time, all of these pigeons individually developed this superstitious behavior, which means they were biased. They understood that their behavior actually resulted in the outcome they were seeing because that learning was programmed in their brain. It was relevant to them. Now, that shows us that a pigeon has a biased perception of the world. It believes that one of them would believe if it bobbed up and down, or it acts as if it bobs up and down, the food will come. Another one acts as if standing on one leg, the food will come. Another one turns in circles. And so you might be saying to yourself right now, yes, but that's a pigeon. I mean, pigeons are kind of dumb, right? And I'm much cleverer than that. My brain is much cleverer. I'm much better able to see reality from falsehood. But actually the opposite is true. You see, the thing is because our brains are so complicated and so complex and so in tune to such a range of stimuli, we have so many of these shortcuts, these biases, these heuristics that allow us to dismiss large amounts of data. Now, I don't want you to do this now, but after the talk, go to Wikipedia, just look up cognitive biases, okay? And you're not meant to read this. This is just a picture. This is a picture of the first screen of the list of like 10 pages long of all the biases that we can suffer from. So the first thing I want you to take away is that when we understand the world, when we make decisions on the basis of our experience, our background, the things we believe to be true, we are not making decisions on the basis of systematic objective data, but on biased data that we have selectively attended to, coded in a way that matters to us, and stored selectively, creating a biased view of the world from our own perspective. So if that's the case, then, if that's how we normally make decisions in this biased, subjective manner, I want to highlight the difference between that and a decision that is based on systematic, objective data. And so what I've made for you here is this chart. It's going to become a chart in a minute, bear with me. On the left-hand side, you're going to see a column, and in that column, there are a list of methods of making a decision. Now, as we go down that column, what you'll find is that the type of decision being made becomes less frequent. So, on the right-hand side, what you're going to see is a little icon that indicates the extent to which that method of decision-making is based on systematic objective data. So here we go. So let me illustrate to you the first two methods of decision-making, which are very, very common in our daily lives and our daily business practice. Let's imagine you're at a business meeting. You could be sitting around a table, you could be on a Zoom call, and one of the members of that team says that he or she has a problem, has an issue. How will the people around the table respond? Well, some of them will say, hey, I've got an idea. Have you tried this? That's an idea. It's a cool, it could be a creative, it could be a useful idea, but it's an idea, okay? It's not based on data. There might be a second person around that table who says, I have experience in this. You know, that's happened to me before. This happened to me before. Maybe it happened 2 or 3 times. And when I faced that problem, this is what I did. Now, the person listening who has the problem could take into account these sets of suggestions, the brilliant idea, the experience, etc. But the data that that person is using for that recommendation is not based on systematic objective data. It's based on the individual who made the recommendations, subjective, biased view of the world. And so you can see that the smiley face icon on the right hand side there, well, actually it's not a smiley face. This person's mouth is flat, because it's based on biased subjective data, not systematic objective data. Even if a person has a lot of experience, it's still scientifically a sample size of 1. So what other kinds of ways are there that we can make decisions? Well, I'm going to give you 3 here, and these are all the three that we really focus on developing in your ability during this course, Data and Decisions. So the first one down there is estimating based on available, systematic, objective, and reliable data. A good example of that could be, for example, going to the published literature and reading about the topic to learn what is already known about this particular area, about this particular problem, what has been established by science. You see, in business, we often tend to act like, who knows, nobody knows, or we're inventing the wheel for the first time. But actually, a lot of research is done on a lot of topics. And when a peer-reviewed article has been published, that's a good indication that science has something to tell us. There are also sites that have databases that have reliable, systematic data that we can use to understand what happened in that situation and use that large sample size data to estimate what might be true for us in our situation. The next level down is what we call systematic observation or measurement. And that's where, for example, you go and systematically collect objective data. So typical, let me give you a contrast. Entrepreneur gets excited about a product, thinks everybody will love it. That's subjective biased data because I'm excited about the product. I think everyone will like it. An example of systematic observational measurement is to take a sample of my target population, provide them with some of the product, and actually measure their reaction without bias. Do they, on average, like this product? And then the final level of database decision-making is when you actually make, based on your observation, your measurement, your understanding of the available data, you make a prediction about what will happen and you actually test it. This is quite rare in business decisions that are made. It's very common in scientific work. It's very rare in business decisions. But as you can see by the little icon on the right-hand side of the screen, all of those three methodologies involve the use of objective systematic data. And these can help us to be much more effective than simply making decisions on the basis of our creative ideas or our own experience. Because you see, a good idea that you have or a good reason for doing something or the past experience you have is not scientific. We have a subjective, biased view of the world. And although decisions that we make on the basis of that subjective data might feel right, these kinds of decisions are actually masquerading as objective data. They lead us to decisions that kind of feel right, based off everything I've seen. This is correct, but it's not objective data because everything you remember seeing has been subjectively selected and coded just for you. One of the best and most visible examples that we have of the contrast right now is actually Donald Trump. Donald Trump has no capability to see beyond his own experience. And he treats this as if it's objective data. So when Donald Trump says, "Who knows? Nobody knows," what he means is he doesn't know. When Donald Trump says, "I don't think that's possible," what he means is he has not experienced it. Just because he hasn't experienced it doesn't mean that there aren't many thousands, maybe even millions of people out there who have. His biased view of the world is not based on systematic objective data. Okay, so why should you care that there's this difference between decisions made on the basis of systematic objective data and decisions that we make on the basis of our subjective biased view of the world? Well, here's one aspect of your daily business interaction where it should matter a very great deal, and that is performance reviews. Now, we all kind of expect that if we work hard and we produce good results, that somehow or other the world is fair and that we will be noticed and we will be appropriately rewarded for those good results. But the thing is, the people around us are biased as well. So when it comes to performance review data, most performance metrics that managers are carrying around in their head are not really objective and systematic. In fact, most performance metrics have a kind of flimsy sort of feel to them about what a manager actually wants to see. Managers carrying around, typically if you interview them, a gut instinct about what matters. They can't necessarily give you the full KPIs and the measures. What they say instead is, oh, well, the person has to be like this and they should be able to do that and they should be able to do that. When they think about how somebody's performed, they use data that's easily available. Now, how can I make that statement with such confidence? It's because this is called the availability bias, and everybody does this. When we think about someone's performance, we use data that's easily and readily available, and that means the things that I'm most likely to remember in judging your performance. It doesn't mean that my perception of your performance is a systematic objective review. What it means is the things I remember are the stuff that mattered to me at the time. So I want to paint this picture for you. So let's imagine your manager's great at his or her job, and they're really a nice person and you get on with them well, and maybe you even had coffee yesterday. But the thing is, like most people, probably 95% of people in 95% of companies, they have not been trained in systematic objective performance reviews. And so when it comes time for your performance review, your manager sits down and says, okay, what are all the things I remember from the past year or past 6 months about this employee? So this is a biased subjective view of your performance. What do I happen to remember? And what I happen to remember, because of the way our brains are programmed, we're the center of our universe, most likely has to do with things about me rather than things about you. But your manager's a really nice person. They're trying to do their best. So they write down the things they remember about your performance. What do they do next? They go and speak to the people you work with. And they ask the people you work with for their feedback. In other words, those people's subjective biased remembrance of what you've delivered this year, okay? And so what you can see is that by that person's opinion, your manager's opinion, and the opinion of your peers, while it all may be very nice, it's not objective and it's not systematic. Your evaluation is being based on people's biased subjective view of the world. Should that matter? Well, maybe you think it doesn't matter that much. Maybe you think, yeah, it could affect their evaluation just a little bit, but really most of the time my manager's like basing it on results. Okay, great, I'm happy for you, but let's see what might happen if you're affected just a little bit. Okay, so in this next experiment, what happened is this. The experimenter gave a group of people 6 photographs of a man. And they asked that group of people to rank those 6 photographs from 1 to 6 in terms of how handsome that man was. So they ended up with an agreed ranking. 1 is most handsome, 6 is less handsome. They then took a completely separate group of people and asked them a completely different question, which is, based off the photograph only, rank these men in terms of how good you expect them to be as managers. And what they found was there was a perfect correlation between how people perceived a person in terms of his handsomeness and how people perceived a man in terms of his managerial ability. So in the absence of a lot of systematic data, this is likely to be affecting people's perception. And even when there is objective data, maybe there's just a little tweak there. Are there other tweaks? Oh, yes, there are. Now, I don't want to put too much emphasis on this because I don't want anybody leaving this session feeling really depressed, okay? But there are so many of these biases that we have about people, and often they exist in stereotypes. And what stereotypes do is they cause us to dismiss large volumes of information about people. And so some of those that have been measured in the workplace, for example, people who are overweight have a much greater tendency to be perceived as lacking in discipline, irrespective to some extent of the efforts they make to show how disciplined they are. Older people likely to be perceived as having weaker memories, even if they're performing at the same level as a younger person. We expect Asians to be good at analytical tasks. We expect women to be accommodating and do things for us. So when they don't do what we asked, we kind of judge them harshly. And we have a stereotype that men are lacking in emotional intelligence. Now, here's the thing. What science has shown us is even for the large number of people who don't believe these stereotypes are true, they still affect the way we process information. And so a man would have to give an awful lot of evidence that he had emotional intelligence in order for that to overcome the stereotype. Now, still, you may be saying, these are small tweaks in people's behavior. Should it matter? Shall we have a look at that? Okay, so if there's a small degree of bias about how your performance is perceived, do you think that it could affect your promotion prospect? Let me show you the results from a simulation. Okay, in this simulation, we have 2 groups of employees. One group is yellow and the other group is blue. There is no difference between them except one group is yellow and one group is blue. So neither one of these groups is performing better than the other. Okay, they're yellow employees, blue employees. And in fact, these employees were assigned random performance metrics. So again, there should be no systematic difference between the performance of one group and the performance of others, except for this. In the simulation, and so we start off, let me show this. We've got 8 levels of seniority in this company. And at each level of seniority, we've got 50% blue employees, 50% yellow employees. The employees are awarded, as I said, random performance metrics. But the only difference is in the promotion decisions that are given, the yellow employees get a 1%, that's 1 in 100 advantage over the blue employees. That's it, 1%. After 20 promotion decisions, now this is 20 promotion decisions across all the employees, not 20 promotion decisions for you, across all the employees, what pattern emerges? Well, what we see, and I'm sorry, this chart isn't wildly clear, is that after 20 promotion decisions, there's a 65%, 35% bias split in favor of the yellow employees. And the yellow employees were simply given a 1% benefit. So what can be done? Well, you might be left feeling really, quite depressed by all of this. And that's not my intention at all, because believe me, as a short Australian woman doing mathematics, these things have affected me to some extent in my career as well. So there are things we can do about them. Okay, so first of all, this is one of the things that I teach on my course. You see, what's really important is that when we're learning these techniques for using objective, systematic data, that they're actually practical, that you do things with them. And what I'm aware of is, I don't want these biases to affect, for example, the grades I give out. So what I did in March of last year, when I'd finished one of the courses on data and decisions, I had a look at whether or not there was any systematic bias in the way I was grading male or female students. You see, there is a stereotype that says that men are better at mathematics, and that potentially, and yes, it does affect people's grading. There are many studies that have shown it can affect grading. I wanted to be sure that I wasn't succumbing, even though I don't believe in it, that I wasn't accidentally marking the men higher. I also wanted to be sure that I wasn't accidentally marking the women higher to sort of try to make up for it. So what I did is this: I downloaded the grades, turned them into gender A and gender B, and then I had a look at the difference in the grades I was giving. And what you can see here is that one gender was scoring on average 74.4 and the other on average about 73.5. And it might look like there's a difference, but this is where you can actually run a statistical test and say that actually there's no significant difference in the grading curves of these two groups. Now, if you're familiar with mathematics, if you're familiar with statistics and data analysis, you'll be able to interpret the results of this t-test yourself to see that it's quite clear that there's no systematic difference in the grading between the groups. If you're not familiar with that, that's exactly the kind of skill we're teaching, but as I said, again, in a very applied way. As an employee, my strongest recommendation to you, and we work a lot on this in the course, but I want to give you something of value today, and that is to aim for performance metrics that are measurable, objective numbers. I have also sat one time in a performance review where my manager said, oh yes, you seem to be doing a good job, but you see, not everybody likes you. To which I was able to reply, but you didn't hire me for everybody to like me. You hired me and asked me to deliver a 3, and I delivered a 4.5. Now, while I'm very open to feedback on ways I can improve, I want my performance to be measured off my performance and not whether or not people think they like me, okay? So what you need to do is create performance metrics that are measurable, objective numbers. Collect that data and communicate it yourself. Don't rely on someone else to do this for you. So here are a couple of examples. Maybe you work in a client service facing role and you have a whole lot of colleagues and your personality is not quite the same as theirs. Maybe they're really bubbly, outgoing people and the clients always say, oh, that person was so nice, that person was so great. But the same isn't said about you because your personality is different, right? But let's say that you decide to measure the outcome of your client projects and you can tell your boss 80% of the clients that I was given came back to me again later for repeat business. Now, what we know from studies is that if you have that objective data, it really can override people's subjective perception when it comes to the performance review. Maybe you're in the HR field, you implement an initiative, you can say that there was a significant reduction in employees' sick days after your initiative was implemented compared to before. This is measurable objective data. You show your manager how it was measured. You show your manager how you can show the difference, and it can actually help ensure that your performance is being evaluated on the basis of objective, systematic data. Okay, so just briefly now, I want to talk about what are some of the other practical applications of this particular course, Data and Decisions. You see, some of you will have tuned into a course on data and decisions expecting to see big data, lots of really technical databases and all kinds of fancy software. And for those of you who are looking for that, please allow me to reassure you, we do have that. We have lots of those kinds of courses at Hult that you'd be able to take. We have lots of professors who would love to teach you Python and R Studio and all kinds of big data analysis, okay, big data mining. But those are typically subjects that students can choose to take. The course that I teach is a core course. And what this course does is it focuses on helping you to understand really how to make better database decisions in your daily business practices, because we know they can make you more successful. So how can you go about answering a problem with systematic objective data instead of your own subjective biased perception? So for example, that has high application in the world of consulting, both internal consulting, perhaps to another department or senior management, but also external consulting to a client. You see, if a client has a problem and you're going to rely on brilliant ideas or your past experience, here's the issue, is that your client in their client company probably also has their own brilliant ideas and certainly has a lot of experience, quite possibly a lot more experience than you in this industry. But how I am frequently able to offer real tangible benefit to my client is that in the business world, not a lot of people use systematic objective data. And so by giving them a potential solution to their problem based on systematic objective data, I give them something that is much more valuable than what they might be able to come up with by themselves. And that's what I want to teach you to do on this course. Make your own decisions, help your management make better decisions, help your client make better decisions based on data. And I'm going to give you just one last very specific example of my students doing exactly this, okay? So I'm based in Dubai. In the UAE, the government decided to close all schools and educational establishments on the 8th of March. Now, it's going to be really hard for you to imagine back then, because honestly, even though it was 6-7 weeks ago, it feels like it was last year sometime, right? But on the 10th of March, the UAE was actually one of the very first countries to close the schools and educational institutions. And when I took this, the previous work, the week before this, I was teaching in the classroom. By the next week, I was teaching online and all the students were sitting in their homes doing the simulation online. And I said, today I'm going to give you a leadership simulation, but is based on data-based decision-making. So effectively, I'm giving you the job of Sheikh Mohammed or Dr. Tedros from the WHO. Here's the business problem. The UAE announced on the 5th of March that from the 8th of March, all schools and educational institutions will be closed. This was actually, even though a number of people were criticizing it at the time, this was actually an adaptation and adoption of global best practice, because Japan had in fact already done the same thing. The question is, what should happen next? So my question to the students is, this is the action the government has taken. If you're in charge, what are the next 3 things you do to protect the population? Now, I don't want you to go into a room and brainstorm. I don't want you to come up with your brilliant idea. I want you to make recommendations based on systematic objective data. So let's start digging into it. The UAE has a highly international, highly diverse population, of which the vast majority are expats. The population is heavily concentrated, with almost half of these 9.5 million people living in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. And Emiratis in total, local nationals, number only about 400,000. And so a highly contagious disease like this could actually threaten their existence. So how are you going to go about making recommendations to the government? Well, the key is what they did is they followed the methodology I taught them, which is, first of all, start defining what variables are involved in the problem and get your data from authoritative sources, not somebody's blog, not infographics, not somebody's opinion. So what the students did is they started collecting systematic data from authoritative sites like the World Health Organization, like Johns Hopkins, and start going through the key variables. The key variables are the following. 1, how is the virus transmitted? and they could ascertain the 2 or 3 actions that were most likely to transmit the virus from one person to the next. Now, secondly, analyze your variables for the UAE. Look at life in the emirate, the nature of the population, the nature of their activity, and collect systematic data about where are the hotspots. If these are the transfer mechanisms for the virus, where are they most likely to occur? Where's the footfall? Where are people coming in close proximity? Map those out for me. When you've got those sources of systematic data, you identify your relevant database findings. Where do the two concur? The transmission mechanisms and the possibility for the transmission to happen within this local environment. And on the basis of your findings, make database recommendations. Now, what I want to share with you is some of the recommendations they came up with. And I want to highlight that right now, those recommendations might seem relatively straightforward because they've happened. And that is another bias. After the fact, it's very easy to say that that was obvious. But before the fact, that's not the case. So I want to take you back to the mindset of the 10th of March. So here we go. We've got data from Johns Hopkins database. And this is the 9th of March. This is a very long time ago. At that point, there were 110,000 cases in the world, not 3 million, 110,000. In fact, the US is down here. It has 554 cases. It wasn't even on anybody's radar screen. Okay, so this is a long time ago. The UAE has shut schools and educational institutions, and on social media, people are criticizing them, saying things like, oh, why would you do that? We already know kids can't get it, etc. Okay. So what did my MBA class do? And this is just another indication of that at this point, the UAE has 74 cases. Hardly seems like a crisis, right? But they sort out the data, they did the analysis, and here's an example of the recommendations they came up with. Number 1, close the borders. No one was talking about closing the borders at that point. Most people were talking about stepping up measures in the airport. Okay, I think maybe at this point New Zealand had said anyone flying into the country has to spend 2 weeks in quarantine, but nobody had been talking about closing the borders. Okay, it says for 30 days, fine. You can't get everything right, but they said shut the borders. Secondly, they said we need to ask people to spend 2 weeks in quarantine at home. Now that was barely in the mindset of the Italians at that point, to quarantine people at home. And then finally, with 74 cases in the country, one of the key recommendations they made was make virus-specific medical facilities available for people well ahead of them being needed. Now, I know that it's not the most cheery and uplifting subject in the world, okay? But the amount of satisfaction, the personal satisfaction they got from seeing the value of the recommendations they were able to make to their leadership, or their simulated leadership, we didn't actually call Sheikh Mohammed, this was a simulated exercise, was that through the rest of March and into April, they were emailing me saying, they've just done what I recommended. The government's doing the things that we predicted. Now, what I am not promising you, I'm not promising you that if you take my course, you'll be able to predict the future. That's not my point at all. I'm simply here to show you the value of learning how to make decisions on the basis of systematic, objective data rather than the biased, subjective view that we're carrying in our head. And so in summary, while I don't want to rain on your great ideas, I want you to be inspired. I want you to be innovative. And there are plenty of courses here that will teach you to have great ideas. I want to remind you that great ideas, while they are helpful, they're not based on systematic objective data. And you can dramatically improve your performance in your day-to-day life and in your business by learning the techniques of collecting, analyzing, and appropriately applying findings from systematic objective data. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I have for you today.
Thank you very much, Amanda. This was very, very insightful. I truly hope everybody enjoyed what you had to share with us today. Very nice exercise that you did with the MBA students indeed. And I hope a lot of people got an inspiration from this. We're gonna take a couple of questions since we have 5 minutes to spare. I will encourage everybody to input your questions on the Q&A section button at the bottom of the screen, and we will be taking them in the next few seconds. But first, in the meantime, you guys do that, I would like to ask you, Amanda, a question. And so what do you think Hult International Business School, or what makes Hult International Business School stands out, and specifically during these uncertain days?
Well, I think what's really important in terms of what makes Hult stand out, let me put it this way, it's a really important question, because ultimately, as you've seen, I've done a lot of different things in my life, and ultimately my decision to want to be at Hult is driven by a number of things, and that is that we really do genuinely have fantastic faculty members. And I know that a lot of schools will say that, but let me give you some overview as to why I can confidently say we have fantastic faculty members. You see, when a lot of universities recruit, they recruit for faculty members who have long research records, and that's a wonderful thing. And don't get me wrong, it shows that they're at the top of their academic game. And of course, our faculty members also have strong research records. But one of the key things that we recruit for is a delight, a willingness, and an ability to teach. And just as, you know, as we've been talking about, having a long research record doesn't mean you're a great teacher. So what we focus on at Hult is faculty members who, of course, they have the strong academic, intellectual research credentials. They also typically have significant senior management practical experience, because this has to be about helping people on the basis of what is actually done in the business world. But then thirdly, and most importantly for the people who are listening here today, is that they genuinely care about being great teachers. And so like my colleagues, and all the people I work with, you know, if we're running programs, we're running simulations, we're running activities, and when we find that there's something people they can't apply, they can't use it outside of the classroom, we're racking our brains trying to work out how else could we present this, how else can we teach this so that people can really get it. And that is a major difference versus the other academic environments that I've been in.
Thank you very much. Let's take on some questions that our students have for you.
Okay, if you keep it simple for me, please.
Very simple and very quick, because we don't have much time left. How can we take qualitative data into quantitative data?
How can we take qualitative data into quantitative data? You shouldn't. So there are different forms of data for different purposes. There are very different reasons that you would use those kinds of data. And what's most important is that you don't actually confuse the two. So typically in a research process, say for example, when I was at Procter & Gamble, one of the things that we might do is we might start with qualitative data by taking a sample of our consumers and running appropriate qualitative research to understand how they think and what terminology they use and what matters to them. And then once you have that qualitative data and you understand that group better, and you are in a much better place to set up a quantitative study that accurately collects data from them. Because in a quantitative study, you're not talking to individual people. They don't really have the option to give individualized responses. They can really only tick one of the boxes that you have. So you have to make sure that the boxes are the right boxes, otherwise you're not collecting real data. And one of the only ways to make sure that you're testing and you're getting the right quantitative data is to have done the qualitative research first. So we cover both kinds of data and their uses and how to generate and how to apply to business decisions on the course. But what I am very clear with all the students is they're not the same thing. You can't just mix them together. Sometimes I've had people tell me, oh, we did this survey that was qualitative and quantitative. No, you didn't. They're different techniques, okay? One study can be qualitative, one can be quantitative. It's important that you apply these techniques correctly in order to get systematic objective data.
Great, thanks a lot. One more question. So how to make fast and data reliable decisions when data is hard to get or is not easily available?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so this is also part of why, you know, I emphasize, like, we learn off our own experience. And even though that I've said our experience is biased and subjective, it's really important that we do learn off our experience, right? And so even though I've said like these two most common forms of making decisions are not based on systematic objective data, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them. That would be like telling you not to think. You have to make shorthand decisions based on the best available data at the time. And sometimes you just can't get your hands on systematic objective data. My best recommendation is to do firstly, number one thing, you need to know the difference. Okay, if you know the difference between the systematic, like when you're interviewing someone and you're like, oh, everybody has the impression they like this person. That's when the flag should go up, okay? And that's subjective bias data. It's not system. What people are doing is they're taking a few data points and they're drawing a picture in their head, a bit like right on Tinder, where you're like, oh, this person looks great because you chose 3 data points, and then you create this whole story around them. And then later you're disappointed because they didn't turn out to be the person you thought they were off the 3 data points that you had, or that 10-minute conversation you had, right? So you have to understand what's the difference between a decision that you're making and based on your gut feel, based on your experience, and that's fine. Sometimes we have to do that, but know that it's not systematic objective data. And then when the decision is really high stakes, like who are you going to promote, or where are you going to spend $300,000 on a marketing campaign, or should we launch this product, or does this medicine actually work, right? These sorts of questions, that's where we really have to be taking the time to use systematic objective data. It does take longer. Probably the best compromise is that 3rd level of decision making I was talking about, whereby at the very least you go and look up what is already known. And one of the things I teach the students to do is to look for scientific literature, which in science, everybody looks. You would never consider doing something without going and finding out first what is already known. Whereas in business, people just act like they're starting from scratch every time. So probably one of the best ways to take that step is at the very least, go to some academic databases, start looking at research papers, finding out what is known about this area, because at least that can help you to see, that's funny. My situation seems to be similar or different. You've got some kind of objective perspective to compare it to.
Thank you, Amanda. Last question. I was going through all the questions. There's a lot of them. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. But
come to Hult and do the course.
This is exactly good point. But this is one question that caught my attention as well. So from Kisley, they ask, how can we stimulate people that is not so familiar with number to make data decision?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. Okay. So I want you to think about the presentation today. I hope that I didn't lose you at any point. I hope that it was relatively straightforward and simple and easy to understand. I appreciate it's not trivial. It does take a degree of capability, intellect to be able to follow my argument. But at the same time, it's relatively simple. Now, I could have made this very complicated. Believe me, when you see it and it seems simple, you think, oh yeah, the message was simple. No, the message can be made very, very, very complicated. And so what I'm doing to you is I'm presenting to you actually the output of a huge number of research papers, but keeping it as simple as possible so that I can serve that up to you in a way that you can understand. That's another thing that we actually work on. It is an important skill, is being able to take a lot of complex information and distill it down to something that represents the data and has a foundation based on data, but is simple and easy to understand. And also, actually, it's a lot of work I do with clients, because when people are really sort of techie and into data, they tend to focus so much on all of it, but typically C-suite executives, they don't want to know the decimal places. They don't want to know all the, when I say decimal places, I mean all the details. They're going to ask you, should we go left or right? And you have to be able to translate all that stuff you know into go left, 75% chance it's the right way to go. Okay, so that is definitely a skill that it's good to work on building up.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I think time's up for us today. This was very insightful. I hope everybody got a very good sense of what we do at Hult and what Amanda's work is based on as well. I would like now to invite you all to, I'm going to share my screen again, but I'm going to invite you to go into the chat box, and there you can find 2 links that are meant to be where we are going to actually take all the questions regarding your applications to the master's program or the MBA or EMBA programs. So the first link that you can see in the chat box is for the master's. If you are interested in our programs, global programs, please click on the link. It will take you to a different session where our director of enrollment will be waiting for you to talk a little bit more in depth of these programs, and as well as the MBA and EMBA programs. If you go to the second link, you will be able to also get your answers on these programs. A recording of the video of the webinar today will be sent to you by email in the next couple of days. And this is it from us. I really hope you enjoyed this session. If you can go now into the links that I post on the chat box, it will be great. And thank you very much, Amanda, for your time today with us. I truly hope this was insightful. And if you guys want to join and you think this is useful for you, you can join us next week as well on Wednesday, the 6th of May, with a different topic, maintaining a work-life balance in crisis. And you can register on our website, and you've got all the details now on the screen. Please follow us and connect with us on LinkedIn if necessary as well. But I hope you enjoy now the next session, and wish you all a very good weekend ahead. Thank you very much.